So another element that's commonly used within HTML are forms. You're going to see forms all over the place. Now forms can get fairly complex, and we're going to try to run through as much as possible within this lesson. So here we've got a basic form structure where we're opening a form, closing a form, and within the form we've got our form content. So again, much like the other HTML tags that we had looked at, opening and closing and whatever is in between is part of that form. So much like the body, the head, form, again the same thing. So here we've got different items within the form, and we've got three different types of inputs here. So we've got input text, input type password, input type submit, and here we've got a name for it. And what we've done over here is, again, opening, closing, and that content of the label is there in the middle. And this label is being attached to username. So again, there's a bunch of attributes here within this input, and that's why we have to set a name here as well. You usually do have to set a name for the input because this is what gets used and read on the other side. So wherever you're submitting the form to, if you're submitting it to a constructor language like PHP or .NET, it's going to need to pick up this form information. And this name is going to be how it's going to identify this content. So username is going to be equal to this value, and when it does a get or a post request on username, it's going to return the value that was submitted. And this is only used by the constructor languages, and this is how everything gets tied together from one place, one form, and tied together with wherever the form ends up. And the way to set how and where the form ends up is to set it by action. So we're going to have an action, and then here we just set a URL. So submit me.php. So let's say that we had a file at submitme.php. So this would cause this form actually to submit to there. And then again, we do have some options here. So another common one is method. And we have those options of get and post. And besides get and post, we also have delete and put. So those aren't commonly used. Again, it depends on where you're submitting the form. If the server, if the backend can pick up a delete and put, or if it's looking for those, then you can use those. But commonly, you're just going to be using get and post. And the difference between get and post, so here we're just going to do a get, and we're going to refresh this, and here we're going to type in that information, and when we do the submission, we see that, okay, so we don't actually have a file here at submitme.php, but we can see how get gets handled, and we see that our username got passed, and that password actually got passed within the string. And if you are passing a password, you might not want this type of format, because you see here that when we enter in the password, the characters get hidden, but when we do submit it, the characters are all visible. And this would be one of the cases where you would use post over get, because post is going to be more secure, and it's going to pass the value. It's not going to show the value, it's not going to cache that value, and it's going to show it only to the server that's receiving it. So it's going to be more secure than get. And as well with post, you can send more data. So with get, you do get limited to the data. So when I go back out here, I refresh it, I can see that when I do post it, or when I do submit it, that button, that nothing gets passed within the request variables, and we'd have no information here at the top. So that's just got passed through the headers, and it doesn't actually show up within that URL. So that's how we get a little bit more security. So another common element used within forms is this text area, and as we can see when we go out here, we get this text area. And we can set the size of the text area. and we're setting 5 and 20. And if we notice that this is going to be slightly different because it's not going to be one of those self-closing tags that we do have our opening text area and our closing text area, and that's because the value and the content is placed between these text area tags. Another common one is this drop-down format. So when we refresh it again, we get this drop-down where we can select 2, select 3, select 1, and this is just a default drop-down that we have. And besides the drop-down, we also have these buttons. So we've got radio buttons and checkboxes. So again, we're just doing type, and we're doing radio and type checkbox, and here we're just assigning the name. So important thing to remember about radio buttons is if you want them to function like this, where you can only select one of them, you keep the name the same. If you do give it different names, and you go back out here and refresh it, you're going to see that you're actually not able to uncheck off of them, and you're not able to switch between them. So radio buttons are more of a selection type button as opposed to checkboxes, which you can actually check off both of them and then uncheck them. So that's the difference between radio and checkboxes. And again, when you're using radio, make sure that you are having the same name so that it does give that ability to flip through between the two of them. And we'll see that I changed this back to get, so we can see that what we're passing through here, and once I enter in some content here, I can see that my radio button is HTML, my checkbox is 1, check button 2 is CSS. So we can see that these are being passed individually, and the radio is being passed as one selection for radio button. With the advent of HTML5, we got a whole bunch of new types of fields within our selector here. So we can select out colors here. We've got our date, time, and again date and time, and I believe one of these is email. We also have this ability to do the slider, and when we look at our code here, so again, our first type, we're able to disable it, and the type is a number. So when we go over here, our first one, so I should actually take off that disabled, and let's take off the class. And when I go back and refresh it, we should have the ability to type in a number. So right now I'm just trying to type in some letters, and it's not really giving me that ability. I guess it does let me do the ease because hexadecimal, but it doesn't let me do any other numbers. So, and I can see here that I do have these clickable ups and downs, that increments for the numbers. And then here we just had our date. We had the next one was color, and then after that was email. So when we try to type in something here that's not an email and we submit it, we get this little pop-up that says we need to include an @ symbol. It's missing within this email. So when we do put that in, we should be able to submit it. Next we've got a range, date, time, local, and then we've got month and a URL. So if we don't actually put an actual URL format here in the last one, type 8, we're going to see that we get the same type of error where we got email. So this has to be within a URL format. So when we do it like this, we should be pretty good right now in order to submit our data, and we can see that now we're passing a whole ton of information here. So again, these are new types from HTML5, and a lot of these should be available in the modern browsers, but again, you have to take heed into when you're applying these because they may not work as easily on older browsers. So that's something to always take note of and make sure that you do test these out. So this has been forms, and as you can see, there's a lot of options for forms.